What's up my friends, welcome back, you're watching Hard Video Order Stuff, and in this video I'm seeing what it's like to color grade ProRes RAW. I want to find out how fast it runs, what it's like to grade, what kind of dynamic range you get, and whether it's worth the larger file sizes. I'll show you how I went from this to this, and now I'm going to shut up and roll that intro. As ever, links to everything mentioned in this video I've popped in the description box below, and of course this isn't sponsored content, so your support means a lot to me. If you could hit the notification bell next to your sub button, just means the world to me, it makes a big difference to the channel, and you won't miss a video. Thank you kindly. So in this video I don't want to go too deeply into the difference between recording formats, that's not what this video is about. All I'll say is that RAW formats capture all the data coming off your sensor, whereas with all other formats, there's some sort of compression one way or another. ProRes RAW is just Apple's proprietary version of RAW, which gives you the flexibility of RAW, but the speed of ProRes, apparently. Of course, that's a ludicrously simple way of talking about RAW, but there you go, that is sufficient for this video. So I'm using Final Cut Pro to look at these RAW files, and the first thing I noticed is that whilst they ran sort of slowly, they were much faster than I expected given the file sizes. And that's one of the huge advantages of using ProRes RAW. Of course, you can switch to optimized or proxy media, which will speed things up massively, but just know that A, it takes time to transcode files of this size, and B, you lose the amazing raw flexibility that you get and what I'm just about to explore. So for now, I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm not going to transcode it. I'm going to edit it as a raw file. If I need to speed things up, I'll just switch to performance mode. Incidentally, I have done a video called Ways to Speed Up Final Cut Pro, and it's packed full of good tips for you. I'll link it up here and below. So in Final Cut now, and I've imported our clip. As you can see, it looks pretty odd. The highlights are completely blown out, but this is all perfectly normal. So let's prepare this clip. So I'm going to come up to the inspector in the top right hand corner, and then I'm going to go to the info tab. Here, as expected, it gives you some information about the clip. We're not really interested in much of this. I want to come down to this drop down menu, and then I'm going to go down to settings. This is where we can change all of our raw settings, and this is really the magic of raw footage. Now the main parameter I'm interested in is the raw to log conversion, and that's because I want to change it into a log curve. That's definitely the way that I feel most comfortable grading. So when we click on this drop down, you can see there are several options. There's Canon log, DJI D log, Nikon, Panasonic, Sony S log. My preference is Sony S log 3 and S Gamma 3 Cine. When I select this, keep your eyes peeled on those highlights. Boom. Now we have a really nice flat image ready for grading. Of course, there's also the option to add a camera LUT on top of this to correct for the log curve. When I select the appropriate one, it looks like this. And of course, it looks a little bit bright. So let's change the ISO. This is just one of the coolest things about RAW. Dropping it down a stop has basically fixed the blown highlights in the background. Down a bit more and it looks even better. But as I mentioned, this is not the way that I like to grade. So I'm going to turn it back to default, and I'm going to turn the camera LUT off. And that's just because I want to choose my own lookup tables later on. For me, the best way to approach RAW is not to think of it as some kind of behemoth that's slow and difficult to grade, but as something that's really super flexible. In Final Cut now, and I'm going to start with the clip that you saw at the beginning of the video. And just to give it some context, this was shot on the Sony FX6 with an Atomos recorder. And in terms of size, the clip is actually only about 13 seconds long, and it is 2 gigabytes, so they're pretty weighty, pretty hefty files. My chain of alterations I make when grading would usually go something like this. Color wheels first for exposure and color corrections. However, recently I've been loving this Lightroom sliders plugin that I reviewed not long ago. It's pretty great, and I'll link it below for you if you're interested. Next, I use color curves for contrast adjustments. This is optional, and I'm not going to use it for this one, but I will for the next grade. And then a lookup table followed by a final instance of color wheels for final tweaks. Anyway, let's get started, and the first thing I like to do is add my lookup table and then grade into it. My go-to lookup table at the moment is still the Phantom LUTs neutral lookup table, and this will do your log to Rec 709 conversion and then take it a little bit further. There seems to be a lot of confusion around this. People think that you need to first convert to Rec 709, then apply other things on top of that. You don't with these lookup tables. They do a really nice conversion to Rec 709. However, as this is is quite an autumnal looking clip, I want to accentuate that, so I'm going to go with the tungsten lookup table. I really love what this does to the background. Next, I'm going to do my exposure and color tweaks, and I'm using the Lightroom sliders plugin, which works so well it's now become a permanent fixture in my chain of plugins. I'm going to fast forward this bit. Basically all I'm doing is making the image much more punchy, giving it contrast, softening the highlights, giving it a bit of saturation, and really just leaning into those autumnal colors. And then you can see when I turn it off and on, it's a huge difference. Love this plugin. Incidentally, Eric, the creator of this plugin, did give me a discount code for you guys. You can use the code HARV at the checkout and gives you 10% off. Finally, I want to give our grade a final polish, and that's why I've got the instance of color wheels at the end of our chain. All I'm going to do is give it just a tiny extra contrast boost, and then do the trick of desaturating the highlights a little bit and bringing up the saturation of the shadows just a touch. It's a cool trick, definitely worth a try. And there's the before and after. What a truly gorgeous clip to grade. Next, I wanted to try grading this clip, which looks like it was shot in a very remote, very cold location. Let's see what we can do. This time around, the chain of plugins I've got is the Lightroom sliders again, and then color curves, so I can really contour that contrast. And then, of course, I've got a lookup table. So let's get to it. And job number one, of course, is to add our lookup table, and then I'll tweak from there. I'm going to go with the Phantom Arri neutral lookup table because it's just amazing. It's a really good starting point for almost any grade. And again, I just want to start by making minor tweaks to the exposure and color. I'm basically just pumping it up slightly without making it look sort of overdone. One thing I really like is the transition of color you can see in the background. So if I can accentuate that, I'm definitely going to do it. And then turning it off and on, you can see some extra contrast, and I've really accentuated the pinky hue on that horizon. Moving on to the color curves, and this is something I like to play with when I'm dealing with footage that has a lot of dynamic range like this ProRes RAW. So I'm adding plenty of control points, and then I'm just going to tweak, and it's not going to be anything too drastic. I'm just going to push and pull a few of them and see what looks best. And that's kind of it. You can see from the before and after the changes I've made. As always with this kind of thing, there's no right or wrong. This just looked good to me. And of course, there's infinite ways you can go with a grade like this. So after all that, what are the takeaways from using ProRes RAW? Well, I found the clips to be completely lovely to use. The files are beautiful looking, and there's a ton of dynamic range. The way you can recover all of that highlight and shadow detail is just crazy. It's also super easy to work with, and I did find that ProRes RAW runs noticeably faster than other RAW formats that I've tried, like Red and Arri RAW. The only downside with using ProRes RAW that I can see is the storage side of things. But given that they're actually fairly lean RAW files versus other RAW files, it's kind of an advantage. As for tips for grading ProRes RAW, I would say the most important things to remember are you can transform your RAW footage into whatever you're comfortable grading. Whether that's Rec 709 or some sort of log curve, you can do it. Secondly, I didn't do this in these grades, but I probably should have. If you need to make overall exposure adjustments, it's best to use the ISO in the RAW settings. Also, once you've got your RAW settings absolutely locked in the way you like, you may want to transcode or use proxies. This is purely just for speed. There is so much dynamic range with ProRes RAW, so don't be afraid to be bold with your grading. The files can take it. It's also worth noting that with ProRes RAW, you don't get all the flexibility that you might get with something like Red RAW. With Red RAW, you can change the color temperature, tint, shadow level, saturation, contrast, and more, all from within the RAW settings. I didn't miss these things using ProRes RAW, as I was able to change them whilst grading with no issues whatsoever. Anyway, that's it for now. ProRes RAW for me gets a huge thumbs up. It's just delightful to use. Anyway, you can ask me questions about ProRes RAW if you want to in the comments section below. I'm down there as much as I possibly can be. I just hope you found this video interesting and helpful. I've got a large archive of videos about videography on this channel, of which YouTube has handpicked this video for you, and the one underneath is my most recent upload. Until next time, let's help each other out and shoot better video. See you guys.